Well, good day, everyone. Welcome to the issue discussion call number 4. This is on our topic today, Facilitator and Core Unit Offboarding. My name is Thomas Flitter, Engagement Lead for Governance Communications. We've got a lot of good folks here joining us today, and want to really start off by welcoming everyone. Thank you for joining us here. This is a very important topic. We've got a number of slides to go through, but I think the good news is that really what we want to focus on today is, posing good questions, talking about a very important topic, and our associated call notes are also linked into the Zoom call. I hope everyone is able to see the slides, and if there's anything else, David, would you like to add anything to the intro here this morning or today?
Yeah, no, nothing.
All right. Looks like we have several core unit members. We've got some delegates here. Thank you for again joining us today. So the issue called discussion is about facilitator and core unit offboard, talk about policy, and really want to hone in on what are some of the policies that we have. We've got today's agenda, which is going to be looking at some of the recent offboarding events. We're going to go through and look at what are our policies, and also what are some of the concerns that have come up in recent times with a few of the voluntary, involuntary offboarding events. And then we'll go through a number of questions through the slides, and really want this just to be a nice open discussion with everyone to chime in. A lot of the folks here today have gone through and experienced these offboarding events. We really want to look at some of the ideas that we could generate to help improve the offboarding process. That really is where we want to do today, is realizing that, yes, we have an amendment that's out there. We'll take a look at that. But also really, what are your thoughts? What are your ideas that we can bring to the table to really, at the end, improve this process, make it a better experience, and to grow Maker policies and make them stronger. But also what's important too is, just as a friendly reminder, this is an open discussion. We want to certainly take these notes and some of these ideas, and maybe some of these do have legs that can help the amendment as it's out there right now. So briefly going through what are some of the key offboarding events that led to the discussion today. We had 3 events that we're looking at in particular. And what I think is important to understand is that we have involuntary and voluntary facilitator offboarding, as well as a core unit offboarding. And the core unit offboarding event really opened our eyes, I believe, to opportunities that we can go about looking at what our policies are and see how we can improve those policies for the next offboarding event. And so the 3 events that we're just going to highlight briefly, I think everybody here is familiar with them. Real world finance, that was an involuntary facilitator offboarding, which actually ended up being a voluntary offboarding event because of the discussion between Rune and Seb, and that ended up being where we found a common ground, I believe, with bringing Will on as facilitator. But it really started with Rune and Seb, and that was something that actually got worked out. But again, it wasn't the optimal offboarding, but we'll talk a little more in depth about that during our examples. The second one was ducks. And this was really a voluntary facilitator offboarding. This is where you had Philip was like, I'm wanting to voluntarily offboard, and here is my succession plan. And so that event really went, I guess, as smooth as possible. And it was one of those that didn't really open up a lot of public scrutiny, a lot of back and forth, but that process went pretty well. The third one is really the big one. That is the core unit being removed, voted on, facilitator and budget. There was a lot of public scrutiny, a lot of forum back and forth. And we believe that there could be some opportunities where we could do a little bit better job, the next time that this event happens. And so what we want to dig into is looking at really, what are some of the offboarding policies? We've got these out there. And before I go any further, was there any questions about the offboarding examples? Any thoughts that I may have missed with those examples? Okay. So our current offboarding policies, these are the ones that are being looked at in the amendment. The offboarding of facilitator, the fallback decision process, also adding, modifying a core unit budget, and also removing the core unit. Those are the four sections in the amendment that we're taking a look at and proposing some new language in each of those. What's interesting about each of those is that they are in place, but there are questions about each of those policies. And each of those policies is really, am I sort of want to say that it's our opinion. It's not really a suggestion, it's opinion or thoughts from the community feedback. It's open-ended questions about, what qualified for an offboarding, some of the processes that we go through. And I think that's what our goal is to tighten up these policies to make a better experience with Maker. A lot of questions were really raised from the community, and I wanted to list those here. What are the concerns? What are we listening to? When we do these issue discussion calls, we listen to the forum. We look at the votes. Artem pulls a lot of stuff together for us to examine and say, this issue is something that seems to be, a big concern for us. How do we address it? And how do we open this up so that we can get input from our community, our delegates, our core units, and say, all right, here are the questions that we've come up with, for offboarding. One is, and I don't know if this question has been really hammered out, but is, who can offboard? I know that some of the examples that we have in particular were, outside core units, outside delegates. They were, maybe someone's a Maker holder. Does that qualify for someone who can offboard? Is it somebody that's a community member? Is that okay with us? That they can come in and say, this person is not really doing a good job. Here's why. And that kind of leads us into the second question, what qualifies for an offboard? The current policies really with facilitator, offboarding is saying, all right, why do you believe that this facilitator should be offboarded? And it's open-ended. And that's what we want to say also is that once that happens, what about the handling of the offboard process? One of the things is that involuntary offboarding, it's really disruptive. It has been disruptive. And it's brought light to some of the opportunities that we need to go in and try to fix and try to make it a better experience. Also, the budget removal process. When we look at the core unit being removed, it's not just the facilitator. You're also, you're also looking at it and saying, well, we want to bring the vote to offboard, or bring the budget offline. And so those things have to be in combination for a core unit. Interesting about the core unit offboarding was that it was a joint vote. It was a vote for the facilitator and the budget, that process, the review process. Was it legitimate? Did we do an ample job in making sure that, there was a succession plan, that all of these things fit into place? And also one question, I don't know if we've really been raised, is that what about the team members? When we ask about offboarding facilitator, what does that impact other core units? You know, it's looking at, you know, maybe there is a member on that team that has, you know, have we vetted all the team members? Are we looking at, you know, a contributor that may be doing a really good job? And so I think when we line that up, it's maybe the facilitator isn't doing a good job, but what about the other team members and the assets that they bring? How do we, you know, talk to them and discuss with them, you know, maybe there's an opportunity for you within Maker, and we keep that as a different matter. One of the things that really struck me too, especially with the most recent event, was that the Defiant came to us and said, and I know David chimed in and several others did chime in, paper and delegates and all that. They wrote an article about, you know, is this going to be tougher? Is tougher governance coming, right? And so I want to pose this question, and I'm just leading off and to think about, in the future, is the media handling the media? And we've got good relationships with some folks. I'm not saying we have an awful relationship, but it's that when we are asked about your governance policies or policies in general or offboarding, you know, can we do a better job handling the media? And I think one of those things is that, you know, talking about our policies, and did we learn from that? Did we learn from the offboarding? And something I was, as a suggestion, and it was brought up in a forum discussion, is that what about, excuse me, what about making it a better, you know, process? Do we do exit interviews or feedback, or, you know, we're bringing on a talent group that's going to really be put on in a situation where they're going to be coming in and saying, how do we handle learning about our offboarding process? You know, it may be good, it may be not good. But one of the things I thought that we could talk about is, how do we make that experience better? How do we make offboarding experience better by listening? So those are really some of the concerns that we've listened to, we've heard, we've read, and I hope that wanted to see if anybody had anything else that maybe they want to add to this. But I hope that these seem like some concerns that you've probably read about or heard about, but I wanted to get folks' thoughts on the current offboarding concerns that we have out there right now. Yes, Peyton?
Yeah, I know one thing that's been on my mind is, like, we currently don't really have an incentive mechanism for like a smooth transition, right? So we're kind of relying on, like, the good nature of the people being involuntary offboarded to kind of continue the work and not lose the investment that we put in. And we think, especially like a firing, like as great as everyone is here, it's hard to know how people are going to react when their livelihood is threatened. And you know, between the core units, we do control a lot of really important infrastructure. So I think for me, like one major milestone for a good offboarding process will be having something in place that really ensures that people are incentivized to cut ties amicably. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, that was like one of the scenarios I thought about is, well, I'm a team member, you know, how would I feel if, you know, I'm just going to use an example. If David was offboarded, right? And what about Artem and myself and all the contributors? You know, what about that experience that, you know, what effects does that core unit being offboarded have on others? You know, we've had to work on some logistics, you know, and while we've ironed them out, it was a little bit of a challenge for us, for our group. And that was something that, you know, we had to find out, consider, work on internally. And it really stretched us a little bit from GovComms, you know, because of certain things that we had to get cleared up. And David, you know, had to work very diligently to ensure that those things were taken care of. So, all right, let's move on then. So we have had some recent activities to address concerns, and that's really where we've listened to what these concerns are. You know, with some of the stuff we pulled from, you know, we had a great David led a great discussion at our GNR call recently. We've got an amendment that's out there. We've got the link to that, and it's still in our, wait a minute, I think it's out there for comment, I believe. And, folks can still, and have made comments about, what's needed for, the latest core unit offboarding. And then, of course, today's issue discussion call. So the first question I want to just put out there is, should there be limitations on who can submit an offboarding proposal? I understand the nature of our business is not a traditional company where you have, a boss saying my subordinate is not doing a good job. He is not doing his work, but the question there is, should there be limitations? Should it be, and this may be just a real quick answer, but is it just, employees of MakerDAO? Is it external? These involuntary offboardings came from really external community members. You have room. Yes, sir. Yes, David.
Oh, I was just going to share my opinion on the question. If you're done with your thought.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I think MakerDAO's openness and permissionlessness around its, operations and proposal process is a key like aspect of the protocol that we should aim to keep. Like, I think there should be limitations for specific proposal types. Like, for example, like maybe like for a budget, right? Like maybe you can propose, anybody could propose the complete removal of a budget, but really only the facilitator should be able to modify their budget, right? Like not anybody could just go and like modify some random team's budget. Like that shouldn't be a thing. But if somebody is looking to completely offboard a core unit, yes, like they could propose a removal of the budget. So like little things like that make sense. But in terms of like, are they a maker holder? Are they not a maker holder? Are they some other stakeholder group that we don't necessarily know? Like, I don't think that's super important. I think what's important is the substance of the proposal rather than who's proposing it. And I think that that's a value that a lot of people in the maker community share.
Yeah, I'd second that just from like a risk of on the governance side, right? The more you like gatekeep proposals, the further you get away from debating the merit of it, right? It's like it becomes more social capital, who's allowed to make proposals and whose proposals generally go through. Whereas when anyone is allowed to make a proposal, it really just is about, all right, what is proposing and why.
Yeah, I think the catalyst for this was, if an individual that has had no experience with, MakerDAO has come in and become a forum member, and then he just puts the signal request out, or, it'll lead into a question I have here in a minute, which is kind of oversight of the proposal. Is it makes sense? Is it, someone who we research a little bit if we don't know them and say, yeah, that's a legitimate, request, or that's someone who's not maybe a core unit member or a delegate, but he's someone who's been in the forum. So I just wanted to pose that to get ideas. Yeah, David.
I think there's like two aspects of this, right? There's the one which is like, should we look into who is posting? And like, to some degree, like maybe there's value to that. Are they a troll? Are they like, but ultimately, like, you can't really go on a witch hunt. Like if they're like a pseudonymous individual, like you really want to spend resources and time to figure out who they are, or do you want to kind of fall back on the original ideal of just relying on the substance of the proposal? And then for this actual substance of the proposal, we have mechanisms in place. We have MIP editors who come and kind of say, hey, like you're following or you're not following the template correctly. And then number two, like you're following or not following the component correctly. So although you may have followed the template, you didn't actually list like the things that are required in the component for you to list. So there's like a quality check that has to happen on the MIP editor side, is my opinion. I don't know if that's actually a part of the process. And then the other piece is, whoever the proposal is about actually like giving a rebuttal from their own voice about the proposal, I think is very, very important. Like how facilitators handle those rebuttals is pretty key. And not everybody is obviously like super trained in public communications, but if you're a facilitator, you probably should know how to rebuttal to what's the word I'm looking for? Rebuttal to these kinds of proposals. But yeah, I see Long has his hand up. Go for it, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said a lot of it was that I was going to say. Just that if we want to ensure some level of quality for proposals, then we should create rules around what the proposal should look like, what the template should be, what it needs to include, versus creating rules over who is allowed to do it, right? The idea should be that anyone can do it, but they need to follow or do it in the right way, right? So one of the outcomes is maybe that the way that we have laid out for doing it is not explicit enough or not detailed enough. So we might want to look at that. But yeah, I don't think it's a good idea to make it about who is doing it versus what is in it, right?
Okay. All right. So yeah, that was, I think that leads into a couple of additional questions that we have along the way here. And one of the keys, I think, is going into what qualifies for offboarding. I think we're doing a pretty good job here with the amendment, but the current policy was really just an open-ended question, if I'm not mistaken. It's why do you want to do this? And we not really have a lot of guidance on saying, what are the qualifiers for that? I think the new amendment, it does a pretty good job so far in the comments and asking about what are the deliverables? What are the implicit deliverables? Is there a possible remedy for this? But I think one of the questions I wanted to ask is if we're proposing, if we're going from an open-ended to a more succinct line of questions, what does that require, for the core unit? If in those explicit deliverables, it says in your mandate, you will do X, Y, and Z. Have you held to that? All the core units prepared for the amendment. I just went out and looked at the MIP for mandate for RFW, right? And it still had, and I just went to the form. It said, Sebastian's still the facilitator, right? I go into the mandate and it says, we will do this, we will do that. Excuse me, RFW, yes, real world finance, thank you. But my point in all that is to say, if we're going to put this out there, what does that require of the core units? Are we prepared for being able to give the explicit deliverables? And when I mean explicit, it says in the comments, list deliverables and responsibilities from the core units mandate, as well as any other specifically declared deliverables and responsibilities. I just wanted to get your thoughts on, now we've got this new amendment proposal, what does that call the core unit? Are we prepared for being able to say, okay, the next offboarding proposal has been made. Now we need to take a look at, what are some of the factors in review process? So I just want to get thoughts on what does that look like in the requirements for the core units? Are we prepared for that? And not for nothing and when we asked about the possible remedies, what are the possible remedies maybe for those core units, David?
Yeah, so I think it's essentially a question of how do you objectively judge a core unit's facilitator by the performance, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there's two sides of it that I kind of see. So one is you set up a mandate and you set up kind of your roadmap and your projects. And, depending on how transparent you are about how the sands may have shifted under your feet, between the time that the proposal was ratified and today, how things have changed, how your deliverables might have changed, all of those things, it's really hard to set them in stone reliably. So that's number one. So if somebody's saying, hey, you're not fulfilling your mandate perfectly, as a facilitator, you have to have a good answer. Oh, we actually dropped this project because of X, Y, and Z context, or, oh, we actually, expanded to this new project that wasn't on our original mandate, but replace, so you have to have a bit of ability to put things in context for how your core unit is performing. Also, I think, essentially it boils down to being able to answer for like criticisms of where the perceived shortfalls are, right? And it's hard to be very, very objective with that because it requires context and there's nuance, and depending on the team, things can really change. Yeah, go for it, Arno.
Oh yeah, regarding to that, I actually wanted to ask something similar. Like how do we identify or even quantify like a threshold for a core unit or a facilitator like missing deliverables or not completing their mandate? Because different deliverables have different effects. Like essentially, let's just say like one core unit doesn't complete a deliverable, but it's small, maybe a video or something like that, compared to another core unit who might not complete a financial report. I mean, that's a clear difference, but like, how do we actually judge and put a threshold on what deserves to be included in an offboarding or promoted offboarding and what doesn't?
Yeah, and I think it's also not even just about the specific deliverable or the specific thing. Like, I think maybe something that the amendment should focus on here is a pattern of missing deliverables, whether they're small or large. Like really what you want to find is not like single instances of poor performance, but more like patterns of consistent underperformance, and address those rather than like, these 2 or 3 specific deliverables. Although you could kind of do both, but yeah, that's kind of my thought on it.
Yeah, and go ahead, Peyton. Thank you.
No, thanks. I guess one concern I have about like, trying to make it entirely about deliverables is it does potentially cap potential reasons for offboarding, right? Like, because there are many legitimate reasons that may not be related to the mandates themselves, like ethical concerns, right? If someone does something unethical, you probably want to offboard them as soon as possible.
Yeah.
There's also like social layer too, right? Like, what if a core unit is delivering on everything they said they're delivering, but everyone hates working with them, right? What if they're really unpleasant, really terrible to work with? Like, there's a multitude of reasons that you might wish to get rid of someone. So you do have to be careful when trying to put in legislation like requirements, as people's motivation for offboarding may not be the same that you had in mind when you were drafting that.
Yeah, and you make a really good point. That was kind of my third question there is, should we factor in emergency offboarding? If a facilitator or someone has just done something that we deem that needs to just be, done, they need to be offboarded because they theft or, some really high severe issues, how do we factor in emergency offboarding? We're prepared for something like that. There was an article that I read recently in another DAO where someone had identified the treasurer as someone who had stolen from their DAO, and they did an emergency offboarding. I can't remember the article off the top of my head, but I read it recently where it was an emergency offboarding, where that someone had identified someone within that company, and they offboarded them quickly. It was like a 2-day turnaround. It was a quick vote. It happened, and they were done. And that's something that I think should be considered as well, as we're talking about not just someone that's in a traditional company. You don't do well, they put you on a probation period. They try to work with you and correct those work issues, but then there are other ones where certain situations where that particular person is just a real sore to the company, and that's something that I wanted to bring up is like, what if that happens, and how do we go about with an emergency offboarding for very severe things? Peyton, you had your hand raised.
Just forgot to take it down. Sorry.
That's all right.
I think piggybacking off of Peyton and your question, I think maybe there should be like recommendations for what should be included in a justification, whether it's underperformance via like explaining it through the deliverables or like an unethical action. You know, I think those should all be recommendations, and I think basically having it as hard requirements is kind of, yeah, it's doesn't really work in my opinion. Like it really is kind of it's like a mix between subjective and objective, because you could objectively say like, oh, this person did something like morally like wrong. And you know, should the whole core unit suffer for it, or should they just be offboarded? It's also kind of challenging because there's no administrative central sort of control over core units. Like what happens when a core unit with a single facilitator who has like, you know, access to the operational wallet, you know, one multi-sig, like what happens when they do something unethical? Like to an extent, like that's a risk that the DAO takes, and they could just cut the tie. Mm-hmm. But of course, like it's very situational. Yeah, I don't really know where my thoughts were going with that, but yeah.
Well, again, the new amendment is, it points out these explicit and implicit deliverables, and I think that's something that we need to continue to marinate on, think about the direction and what those are. I want to move on to another question I have, which is, what steps would help maybe to avoid involuntary offboarding? And we talked about, you know, some of the things that folks will do, and it's been very public. It goes out in the forum. You know, one of the examples we used was with the voluntary offboarding for ducks, and it was clean. It was, I've got a succession plan. I believe this person qualifies. He's been around the MakerDAO, and we'd like to submit this proposal. Okay, that was clean. However, the others really had a lot of public scrutiny, a lot of discussion, and could that have been avoided if we had, and I'm going to get to this question in a minute, but have sort of an administrative person that says, okay, we need to take a step back, and we need to look at how can we avoid, you know, can we come to an agreement? I think that was something that was a common theme that I was reading, like, all right, if a proposal's made, can we take a step back, discuss it internally, find out how we can, you know, do a more of a private offboarding. So I just want to get thoughts on that, because a lot of the things that really sparked a lot of the forum discussion with, especially with offboarding of content production, was that a lot of the grievances were aired publicly. And I just wanted to get thoughts on, you know, should we take steps? Should it be an option where we can have in a group or somebody with oversight administration of pulling this back? And I know, again, comments have been made about it, but I wanted to get folks' thoughts on, you know, maybe what are some steps to avoid involuntary offboarding? Does anybody want to chime in on that one?
I think actually, because of the fact that anybody could submit a proposal, sometimes it will be totally unavoidable. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, somebody could just post a proposal, and then it becomes kind of a question for the public. But in the case where it's coming from an internal stakeholder, or a stakeholder who's like, I don't know, just more ingrained in the community, and honestly, like, stakeholders should care about you know, not taking this to the extreme if it doesn't have to. Like, you know, doing this in public has certain you know, public relations impacts on both the brand, on the individuals involved, you know, etc. So if you do want to address a performance concern or an ethical concern, really, like, you should go to the person first, or the team first. You should go to the other stakeholders at the DAO to get buy-in, right? Like, if a person is wanting to post this, maybe they should go and reach out to the recognized delegates, for example, and explain their reasons and see if the delegates agree or disagree. You know, and I think to an extent, it's going to be a matter of more culture than formalized process. Mm-hmm. for kind of finding a solution to avoiding like very nasty public involuntary offboardings.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are just some thoughts of mine.
Okay. And what I think is an important question too, and it kind of leads into the next slide, is any more comments on avoiding involuntary offboarding? I want to lead that into, would the offboarding process maybe is improved if we had an internal review committee? So some conversations have come up and say, I know Mariano said on the GNR call, could there be an internal review committee that helps process the offboarding request, identify internal solutions, and avoid unnecessary involuntary actions? Has that been something that has been something discussed, or at least brought up? But I was wondering, for the purpose of this call, is anybody have any thoughts on, maybe we should, or maybe we don't need a review committee, a little more oversight or administration on handling these types of events? I think one of them is, how would that look? How would that be? Would that be within a core unit? Would that be an individual that once that offboarding request comes up, then they kind of take the ball and roll with it? They try to work through solutions, but yes, Peyton.
So it feels like good to call it like the centralization risk there, right? Like whether it's one person or a team or anything, you kind of get a whole set of gatekeepers, like when you do require an internal review. However, I do think you can still set it up so you could get valuable feedback from someone. You could have a core unit that wants to provide feedback based on like core unit performance that doesn't have special permissions. That could be very valuable. I also got to attend like I don't know what to call it. They pitched as like a conflict resolution speed dating for DAOs the other day, thanks to Linka. And that was really cool to hear that all these conflict mediators are willing and wanting to work in the Web3 space. And so like there are outside people you can utilize. However, I do think it's a pretty big risk to the organization, particularly to its decentralization, if it's in a gatekeeper function rather than like a voluntary function, if that makes sense.
To actually respond to that, like, can't it be similar to just an assessment and a report that's public that is kind of like open to scrutiny? Maybe they don't have like authority, but they just do an independent assessment. And then there's the option of, are they their own core unit? In which case, maybe they're subject to centralized like influence or something, or can it be actually sort of like a committee of various people from various core units, like perhaps somebody from strategic finance, somebody from SES, somebody from GovComms, to evaluate the different aspects in various cases of core unit like issues. And I think that would probably preserve decentralization and also not act as a gatekeeper, but just more act as like as an assessor, an independent assessor.
Yeah, I think that was the idea, is taking a look at the experiences we've had and saying, well, if we had someone that's independent and we've got all of this process and they are independent of a core unit, maybe it's someone who can say, we've got all of this, we've got the request, we've got the review, we've got the information. What steps do we need to take? Would they be someone who's responsible to try to find, they're trying to avoid the involuntary offboarding, find solutions, find ways, but just, it's a thought. It's almost like an HR function in some regards, someone that gets the data, processes the data, and, goes through that process. And so it's not addressed necessarily in the amendment, nor is it addressed in the current policy, but it was just an idea that actually popped up on a couple of conversations, and wanted to pose that out there to see what you thought. So
another piece of context, this doesn't happen often, right? So it could be something that's assembled in the case that it happens. So I don't actually think it should be a consistent core unit, or if it is, it should be like just a small part of their mandate.
We've got some delegates on the call here today, and some other folks that have seen these processes. Is the internal review committee, is that something that is of interest? Just curious. Yes.
Hi everyone, it's Kianga. Hi. Yeah, I like this idea very much. And David, to your point, like maybe that committee's assembled per incident, and so that you avoid whoever may have a conflict of interest. You can kind of pick among, you know, someone from the delegates, someone from this core unit, and put together that kind of report in a public fashion. But yeah, I really think this would be valuable to consider.
Thank you for your comments. I really appreciate that. And yeah, and so what I was thinking is that, you know, let's table this one, but I think it still has, you know, potential for future discussion. I think what we want to do now is take a step back and move on to the next question, which, unless we've got any other additional comments or anything in the chat. One of the things that really struck us too is that I know that we've talked about the amendment for succession plans and the details of saying if we are going to offboard a facilitator, then we'll need to identify the methods of a succession plan. Enter a facilitator to help with the budget, to help with a lot of the logistical work that is needed. But also something to take into consideration. What is the succession plan, not just for the facilitator being off? What about the team members and contributors of an offboarded core unit? So if you have, let's say, for example, content production, that's, you know, the example of saying we look at the critical needs of that core unit, right? And when we've got a team of people, do they really qualify to be offboarded? You know, what is the succession plan for a team member that may be doing a very good job, and now they don't have a choice? I wanted to bring this up because I felt personal about this. I looked at, and I've interacted with many of the content production folks, you know, have helped our team out on certain projects, certain things. But what is it that we should maybe consider about other team members? And I'll remember this quote in one of the comments was, well, we think you're valuable to the DAO, and now that your core unit's offboarded, well, you can reapply to maybe a new core unit, or we'll find a solution for you. But what does that look like? You know, how do we attend to positive team members, good team members that have actually done well? It seems like there isn't a back and forth or an opportunity maybe for them to move on. I just want to bring this up because I don't think it's really been addressed necessarily. I think it sort of has been addressed, but I'll tell you, I fear sometimes that, let's say if our core unit is offboarded, you know, what would I do? How would we look at the other team members? So what I'm trying to ask is, do we feel like there should be a succession plan that attends to the other members of a core unit, the contributors? Now, and I say that just in light of the recent content production offboarding, they offboard the whole team. David, I know you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, and sorry for hogging the mic so much, but I've been thinking about this stuff a lot. I think there should be an important distinction to be made between offboarding a facilitator and offboarding a core unit. When you're offboarding a facilitator, you're recognizing that the work and mandate and the fundamental work of the core unit is valuable. So you understand there might be a lot of dependencies. You understand that core unit might be tied to a key roadmap item. You understand that, perhaps 90% of the core unit is great. It's just the facilitator that has issues. Okay, that's one case. But then there's the other case of, okay, we as stakeholders think the entire core unit's mandate of work is just not valuable enough to keep around. And we're essentially like gutting the team. And that's a pretty crude way to say it, but nevertheless. And in those cases, like what's important is, you want to retain as many relationships as you can. Like, I think it's important not to burn bridges if you don't need to, and to give people second chances, because there are, a ton of resources put into onboarding a given individual to MakerDAO. There's a huge learning curve. And people who do end up really sticking around, who are talented, like they are very, very valuable. And I think it's important to be able to route them to other opportunities of the DAO at other teams. But yeah, so my whole point is there should be a distinction between those two cases, like very strong one.
Thank you. Does anybody have any other comments about this question or thoughts? Now, granted, this is just our call, and if you have any more thoughts or comments, please DM our team or myself, so we can certainly listen in on what other ideas you may have.
I have another comment, and just kind of like a best practices for departments and organizations type of thing. So I think I learned from one of my old mentors that, a really good leader makes sure that that they're training up somebody in their shoes always, because you never know when you're going to go. And I think that applies for core units with like very fundamental sort of mandates of work. So, a great example is GovAlpha, right? GovAlpha has a goal to have 3 governance facilitators. The reason for that is redundancy, right? It's security for the protocol. They are a fundamental key piece of the operations of MakerDAO. And so any core unit that has that kind of designation, and obviously it's kind of subjective, and I'll leave that question open, but yeah, succession is really important. Make sure you're training a prodigy. Make sure that you have your dependencies and all your key stuff listed somewhere. That's essentially it. Like, you want to basically future-proof. You want to reduce the bust factor, right? You want to future-proof MakerDAO by not letting it depend on the stuff that's all in your head, basically, if you're a key core unit. But of course, that's a judgment that has to be made by each individual.
Yeah. And I think I want to add to that is, when we're talking about a succession plan for facilitator, or, do we give enough time to wind down? I know that the end amendment is saying, for offboarding, we're going to give 2 weeks to winding down. And the period may need to be longer than that. There may be, like to David's point, a lot of stuff. If we offboarded, GovAlpha, I'm just going to throw that out there. There is so many things that need to be taken in consideration, right? And so I think that in the amendment, it's talking about it like a 2-week period, or it's been suggested a 2-week period. But I think that we should, I don't want to say it that. Let me say it a different way. We should consider the winding down period may take a long time, and it impacts a lot of different core units. So
I think that's primarily a communications challenge, because obviously each core unit has different requirements. Like, some core units can wind down in 2 weeks, but others might need 3 months, right? And yeah, even Long mentions in the chat, like that GovAlpha keeps 3 months of a continuity emergency fund, and actually GovComms does the same thing. But yeah, there's kind of specific rules that govern when we could use that. But yeah, transition periods, I think, are a function of the competency of communication from facilitators, in my opinion.
I just want to also be mindful of time, and I've got 1 or 2 other quick questions I want to pose. The next one is about media, and I think this one's a little more straightforward. I think we held well with the defiant and the comments that were made, but we had several delegates. We had core unit members make comments. The writing, I believe, was fair to a degree and balanced. But what I wanted to pose is, okay, this is going to happen again. We have some good relations with the media, and, should those media inquiries be more centralized, like have more of a centralized factor, like we have an actual statement that we make, or an offboarding statement, an official statement for Maker, or, part of what we do in, GovComms is to say, we're reaching out and touching base with media. And I think, again, we did a pretty good job with this last one, but it's going to happen again. It may be more severe. It may be more complicated. And even with some of the comments that were made in the article, I just wanted to get quick thoughts on, could we do a better job in reaching to the media, maybe making an official statement? Should there be some sort of legal statement? In my opinion, I was just thinking, hey, we're always going to have to communicate with the media. Have we done a good enough job, a satisfactory job, and what we did, and how do we see that in the future? So I just want to get quick thoughts maybe on handling the media. Are any concerns with the media? If we're doing great, then all right, check the box, right? But it's just something that lingers in my mind. I know, and especially our team and others, maybe, can we do a bit better job with the media? Yes.
Yeah, question. Is there like a PR or a press relations person or function? I think there's some value in someone who's got training in that we could publicly say, not that anyone could put forth a statement on behalf of MakerDAO. I think that's problematic, but someone whose job it is to be on top of stories that break, and the media knows that they can go to, and that person can help them understand what's MakerDAO and like understand who's who, and so that at least the press is better informed of context. If they want to pick a comment from someone on the forum, they may not really understand this concept that this is a decentralized community. So I think it's be valuable to have a person who's trained or part of a core team that can be a designated go-to, but not someone that could put out a statement on behalf of the DAO.
Yeah, I could actually speak to that if you'd like, Thomas.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like I said, I'm not saying that we're in dire straits, that I think we handled this one well. And David, I know, is going to add more to that, just in our relationships with the media and thoughts on it.
Yeah, so originally when GovComms was proposed, part of our mandate was like media relations support. And it was a very reactive model where basically, because we had access to managing our stakeholder database, any incoming media requests, we would provide a point person, and we would basically route them to the subject matter expert or person involved in whatever breaking story there is. We didn't initially intend to do stuff like press releases or anything like that. And at the same time that we proposed this, content production was proposing a more proactive media relations position, where they were actually hiring for right before the offboarding, where they would do a lot more proactive stuff, not necessarily on breaking news, but more like it was a mix of like, kind of like marketing PR, rather than like reactive sort of like real like public relations, like crisis management style PR. And so with the departure of marketing, we actually put up an informal poll as part of one of our previous like biweekly updates from our team, asking, you know, like we've been thinking and we've put out some writing about like what we think press releases can do at MakerDAO, whether they're a good idea, in what situations would they be appropriate. And really like, you know, we're considering hiring a full-time press relations person for exactly the things that you mentioned, Kianga. And so, yeah, the signal seems to be pretty strong that the DAO would like this. So we are actually going to be building it into our budget for our next budget proposal. But yeah, like for now, we basically take incoming requests, we put them in the forum to a dedicated media inquiries section where only like a specified layer and above of community can answer. And we do our best to kind of, yeah, put them in touch with the people that are actually involved in the breaking story, and not just answer on their behalf, because we think of ourselves more like a router than anything, because we are in a decentralized sort of community, a DAO. So yeah.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that. Again, being mindful of time, I know we've just got a minute here. Wanted to ask, this is the last question in the series here, is something came up about how can we make this a more positive experience? And I think this came from talent asking, you know, is this something that we want to look at? And maybe we want to implement, you know, exit interviews or feedback surveys or something that we can, you know, initiate to learn more about how that last process went. Now, does that lead us into, you know, some discussions that may not be, you know, favorable? Probably, but it also could be a positive experience where we're listening to the folks that have been offboarded and being able to, you know, learn from their experiences. So I didn't know if anyone had anything else maybe they wanted to add to how this could be a more positive experience, but I think it's something that talent will certainly be looking at, because when we have the offboarding situations, they are going to be also very responsible at onboarding new talent, you know, and so what that puts them in a crosshairs of having to answer to a lot of these possible negative connotations about the DAO. When you have an offboard, you know, the next person says that we're trying to onboard talent. Okay, what happened here? You know, so posing the question really, how do we make this a more positive experience? Does that include, again, you know, some of these things with, you know, feedback surveys or exit interviews? It's just a thought that I wanted to bring out to the group here as we wrap up. So any thoughts on the offboarding experience, trying to make that a little more positive? Because it seems a little, right now, the tone is a little negative to a degree. And we certainly don't want folks to say, oh gosh, well, you know, yes, David.
Man, I'm so sorry for hogging the mic, but so many thoughts about this stuff. I think that number one, people should understand that it's cultural, right? Like I think MakerDAO has done really well to focus on the issue and not the person in many cases. But when it is really kind of like, you know, the person at fault, like, yeah, trying to go, you know, as non-public as you can up until, you know, to try to prioritize voluntariness is probably key. Like saving face is very important for people. You know, you don't want to be publicly disgraced because, you know, you took on a role that you might have been like, it might have been too much for you, but ultimately you're still a smart person with a great work ethic. You just weren't right for that role at the time. Yeah. So I think it's very situational. I think in general, it should really focus more on, yeah, trying to prevent like kind of the publicity of it as much as possible when it's not necessary. Like, I think that's the best thing you could do, because then people will actually be willing to do stuff like exit interviews, and they'll be willing to do stuff like graceful transitions, and also in combination with something like a severance package or an incentive, or like, you know, a lead off time period, stuff like Peyton was mentioning. Like all of these things will make the experience, I don't want to say positive, because, you know, it's kind of, I would say it would make it significantly less negative.
Right.
And I think that should be our goal, is really to extract the lessons that we could learn, retain the talent, and to make as little controversy about stuff like this as possible. Because ultimately, when somebody's being offboarded, or community or core unit is being offboarded, it is a case of the DAO trying to better itself, right? The DAO identifies a problem and says, okay, like for us to be better, we have to deal with this. And like that in itself is a very positive thing. It's like, you know, the system is getting better, or the organization is seeking to get better. But how do we salvage as much value from that as we can? You know, how do we retain the talent? How do we, you know, help people save face? Those are some of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Those are very good points. You know, maybe on the outside looking in, they say, you know, let's put it in light that we are trying to better our company, and this is what we've done. We have gone through and provided opportunities, provided severance packages. We've done all the right things. We want you to know that. It's not, you know, just a, you know, something we just cut ties with someone and didn't do the right thing by them. And I think that's very important. So I know we are on time, or out of time. I wanted to ask a quick open discussion. Does anybody have any other thoughts? There's a lot we covered today, many questions. We'll have this information out here soon. And I wanted to see if there's any other thoughts. Some very good ideas today, very good conversations, I think, but wanted to ask anything else.
Just the one thing I could add is that as a DAO, we learn from experience, right? Like the first time we do something, it's almost never pretty.
Yeah.
So hopefully after this becomes a little less raw, some content people might be willing to share, like what it was like on their end and where they think it could be improved, because that would be super beneficial to us. But I think even without that participation, we still have a good handle on a lot of things that could be better. So don't be afraid to iterate. You know, it doesn't have to be, the next version doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be better.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, Peyton. Thank you for that. I do want to remind everyone too, in the call notes, we've got the links to all of the information here today, the forum conversations, the Defiant article, the amendment, all of that. Please go visit, go take a look at the amendment, and you make your comments. This is such a great opportunity for us. And I really appreciate everybody's time joining us. I hope you enjoyed today's session, and we will look forward to the next session. I believe it's tentatively for March 16th, to be determined, the article, the issue. But again, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Take care.